Hello and welcome to You Asked For It. I am your host, Ann Page. Today I have a very interesting guest, Mr. Ernie DeRaps. Thank you so much for being my guest today.
My pleasure, ma'am.
And I just want to tell my viewing audience how we met recently. I was in a restaurant in Richmond, Maine, and there was a wonderful art show on the walls of the restaurant, and I was admiring this wonderful artwork that you see here. And the artist happened to be in the restaurant, and I met him. But what I found out about Ernie is that he has a fascinating story to tell. So could you please tell our readers a little bit about yourself? I know you are one of 14 children, and you were born in Maine, right?
Well, I've been around quite a bit. Washington, D.C., the West Coast, in the Navy, aerial photography, and eventually got married and had 6 wonderful children, which I hope we'll get to see all of this. And I had a wife for 64 years, and she passed back in January of 2015. So it's kind of a lonely house now, but I'm staying fairly busy with my art, and it's God's hands, actually. I just push the brush.
That's very inspirational because you're 88 years old and you didn't start painting until you were 80. So certainly we can say that you can always find something to do in your life no matter what age.
That's what I try to tell some of these seniors when I go to do the slideshows, the Lighthouse slideshows that I do.
Yeah, and you actually took about 3,000 slides when you had a career as a Lighthouse Keeper, is that correct?
Correct.
And now you go around and you do these wonderful slideshows. I haven't seen one yet, but I can't wait. But what I wanted to say is that, Ernie, you had a fascinating career. During World War II, you were in the Navy, and you were trained as an aerial photographer. Is that correct?
That's correct.
You went out to California, and you were flying up and down the coast looking for submarines and, various things that would be really,
from the Japanese.
Yeah, from the Japanese. And that had to be fascinating for a young boy who grew up pretty much in the country.
Yes.
And you had a fascinating life as a child of one of 14 children. And
There we lived on a small farm. My father was a good gardener and provider, and my mother did a lot of canning, so we had stuff for the winter. We lived pretty much off the land, but my dad did have a nice job. He worked his way up into the dye house in the big mill in Pittsfield, Maine, and he was one of the children in his family that had a better education. Most of them were lumbermen and so forth, but my dad really was quite an intelligent fellow.
you told this cute story about he told everyone at the dinner table to be quiet, and what happened?
Well, it was in the hunting season, and he says, "Quiet, kids, gotta be quiet. I've got to open the window." And he picked up his rifle, opened the window, and shot a nice buck out in the garden. So he was protecting his vegetables as well as giving us some meat.
I'm always interested in this question, and I've asked it of many of my guests. What would you say was the most important thing that you learned from your father?
I think the most important thing was, if you're doing a job, do it to the best of your ability and don't quit. Keep at it. Do it until you finish.
Well, you certainly carried that out in your lifetime because you've had many positions and fascinating jobs, not only as an aerial photographer, but you also went on to a career in Washington, D.C. with the Internal Revenue Service. Tell us about that.
Well, shortly after we were married, and that's quite a story itself, getting married, which I never expected to have 6 children, but my wife wanted 2 and I wanted 4, so we had 6. But anyway, as a photographer in Washington, D.C., I was there as public relations for the IRS. And I even taught surreptitious photography to some of the secret agents and so forth, so that they could go into an area and take photographs and not know that they were taking the photographs. And one of the most interesting things that I did while there at Washington, D.C. was that I was asked to go take some photographs And by the time I got out to the place, the fellow that drove me, he says, I'm going to stay right here in the car. I said, okay, I'll get out. And I saw a fellow walking around with a wheelbarrow, a bunch of wood. And I said, I'm supposed to meet some people here. He says, try that building down there. I went down and knocked on the door, and the door opened. I had a .45 pointed right at my head. And it was a big still, and the biggest one they'd ever found in the Washington area. So I have photographs of that, and it was very interesting because they were able to make a lot of illegal whiskey in a very short time.
Did they do a raid then? And that's why you were able to photograph? They were raiding it?
They were there.
That's amazing that you saw that.
But it was just one of those many incidents that happens when you're a photographer.
And you told me that that was during the Eisenhower administration.
Well, it was before the Eisenhower, but Eisenhower came in shortly thereafter. And that's when they had what they call RIF, a reduction in force. And I just happened to be the lowest paid in the division, so I was thrown out of the service. I looked for jobs there in Washington, couldn't find any, and my wife was pregnant, so we came back to Maine and had our first child.
And eventually you left the Navy after you had that career in Washington, and then you came back to Maine and you became a lighthouse keeper.
Well, that is a story within itself because I was in the Navy Reserves, and the IRS kept me off from going back into the Navy. But when I got back to Maine, there was nothing to keep me from going back in the reserves. So that's when I joined the Coast Guard. And I was sent to Boston to fill up a sea bag, came back to Maine, stationed down in Rockland, only 20 miles or so from my home in Belfast, where my wife was living with our son. And I was the oldest seaman there at that particular base, and I believe that's how come I was assigned as a lighthouse keeper.
And that was just a turn of fate. I mean, you didn't really have a goal or a desire, did you, to become a lighthouse keeper?
I had no idea because I knew very little about the Coast Guard when I first joined it.
So what was it like? And by the way, this is one of your wonderful paintings. What lighthouse are we looking at here?
That's the Rockland Breakwater. It's about a mile long, and it protects the harbor there in Rockland, Maine. And I've been by it many times, and this is from one of my many photographs. I call it the passing storm. But
it looks like lightning coming down there,
yep,
is that right?
Yeah, the passing storm.
Yeah.
And we lived out on Vinyl Haven for quite some time while I was stationed at Green's Island out there, which was a stag men's only station. And then my last station before going off to sea on weather cutters was on Brown's Head, on Vinyl Haven, looking across West Penobscot Bay.
Isn't that a very lonely life, to be a lighthouse keeper?
Not when you have your family with you.
Yeah.
I had my wife and children. As I said, we had 6 children, but when we were on Lighthouse Keepers, we went to Monhegan, and my wife was 4 months pregnant. No doctor, no nurse. But we were fortunate enough that she had had some nurses training when she was younger, and things went well. We were there about 5 months, and she said, I'm going to go visit my folks in Belfast. She was gone for 2 weeks and came back with our second child, a daughter.
Oh, so she had the baby in Belfast.
Yes.
That was good. So how did you keep busy in the lighthouse? What was it like?
24/7, there's always something to be done. Maintaining the tower and maintaining the lighthouse. And you never know when some other circumstance is going to pop up. And a lot of it is in the book that we had published. My wife wrote about the 6 people that we took care of from down, let's see, it was about Saturday noon when I picked them up at Monhegan. Their boat had come aground and it was sinking, so they all 6 got out of the boat in the fog. And the heavy surf was spraying them with spray, and they thought they were going to drown. But the fog finally lifted mid-morning, and they saw a building. So one of them went to that building. They called me. I went down, picked up those 6 people, took them to the lighthouse. Some of them were in night clothes, so we fed them, clothed them, took care of them until Monday morning so they'd get on the ferry to go back to the mainland.
And Ernie, you wrote this wonderful book, and it's had an incredible, how many printings is it in now?
This is the 3rd edition.
The 3rd edition, and this one part of it tells your side of the story, and then when you turn it around, the other part tells your wife's side of the story and what it was like for her to live there and cook and raise children.
And those 4 photos are of the lighthouses that I served at.
Right.
3 of them were family lights, and the other one was a stag, men's only station. So I couldn't bring the family there because of the isolation.
What was it like 12 months a year? I mean, winter is very harsh in Maine.
We were at Monhegan, part of a winter, because we went out there, if I recall, in August. I have this all written down, and a good part of it's right there in the book. Mm-hmm. But it's history, and that's why we did it. We wanted people to know what lighthouse keeping was all about. And always something to do, always something to keep you busy. But
because today it's a lost art, is that correct? All the lighthouses are automated, isn't that correct?
It's a lost art, and I was very fortunate to save a life while I was a lighthouse keeper. I was at the Stag Light, and on a morning, Sunday morning at that, a knock on the door, opened the door, and there stood a gentleman with a 2-year-old daughter under his arm and a son beside him, about 5. He says, "My nephew's on the other side of the island. The surf is 3 to 4 feet, and he's going to drown. He's on a rock. He cannot swim." And wouldn't you know, our unsinkable 16-foot motor lifeboat was in for repair.
Oh dear.
So all I had was my own 10-foot punt, and put on a life jacket and took another one with me and went out around the island, had to surf inside the rocks, and found the young man, and he didn't want to get in another boat, but eventually, after about 4 or 5 passes, I grabbed him by a shirt tail and pulled him into the boat and took the boat into shore, tied it so I wouldn't lose it because it was my own boat, and walked him back to the lighthouse.
You didn't give him any choice.
I didn't give him any choice.
That was pretty brave of you, you know. You had a family and a wife to think about.
Well, God was with me. I prayed a lot that day.
That's wonderful.
Especially surfing in, because that little boat, you couldn't take much surf. I managed, and God's hands.
Amazing. We here in Maine had the very first lighthouse ever commissioned in the United States is in Cape Elizabeth, Maine. And it was
by George Washington.
By General George Washington, isn't that correct? Yeah. I just briefly, because I wanted to, I don't have that many people who actually survived World War II because, you know, we're getting up there in age. And what was it like during World War II? I mean, you were a young man, you were in the service. What was the mood of the country like? Can you give me a little insight?
Well, the main reason that I joined the service was because I had lost my mother the year before to what I feel was a hemorrhage in her brain, and I think it was from worry because of my 5 brothers and 2 sisters and a sister-in-law in the service at the time.
Amazing. That many people from your family were in the service.
I had 5 brothers, and a sister was in the wax. Another one was married to a Navy fellow, so she was practically Navy.
Right.
And it was interesting because I just decided I had to help out. That's how come I joined the Navy. And I became an aerial photographer because when I was a youngster in high school, I was able to get my student flying license, and that's how I happened to get into the Navy branch of the air branch.
That was amazing. You know, that was called the Great War, and they never ever wanted another war to follow that one. What is your take on that now at age 88, when you've seen so many wars that followed the Great War? How do you feel about it?
Well, I think that the major thing is that people want. They want prestige, they want money, And the only way they can get it is by killing and hurting other people and taking over other countries. I just pray that the good Lord will get back to this country before it all goes to hell.
You've seen this country change dramatically in your lifetime, haven't you? But yeah, you're a very hopeful person.
Well, I'm worried mostly about my grandchildren and great-grandchildren. My grandchildren are growing up. After all, some of them are in their mid-50s, early 40s and so forth. But my 6 children are all still with me, even though my wife has passed. But, well, matter of fact, Thanksgiving's coming, and I'm going to have over 30 people at my home for Thanksgiving dinner.
That's incredible. Now, when you finished your career as a lighthouse keeper, you embarked upon another career in construction. Can you tell me, just elaborate a little bit about that?
Well, prior to that, I worked 22 years for the state of Maine.
Oh, that's right. Mm-hmm.
My first job, I put buoys in the large lakes, because that was natural. Coming from the military and the Navy, or actually the Coast Guard, buoys were part of the deal. Anyway, I was that for about 5 years, and then I was snowmobile coordinator for 5 years, traveling the whole state. And my last job with the state of Maine, I was state and federal pesticides inspector. And we got the first in the nation returnable container law for pesticide cans, which I'm very proud to say I was able to do.
That's wonderful.
With the help, of course, upper personnel. So.
And you had quite a career on the sea, too, didn't you? In addition to being a lighthouse keeper.
After my lighthouse career, I was sent off to sea. And actually, I was on 3 various vessels. The first one was the Coos Bay, 311-foot Old Navy vessel. And we'd go out and try to stay in a 10-square-mile area sending up weather balloons. We were also a checkpoint between the continents, aircraft and ships. And I had to be on one for at least 18 months before I could even ask for transfer.
It's amazing you were separated from your family for 18 months.
Well, we were out a month and back in for about a month.
So that's good.
So I did get to see the family every other month. But one time we were gone for 3 months. That was a different story. But as I was saying, had to be on one for 18 months, so I asked for a transfer. I got it, 318 feet up the dock to another vessel, same type of vessel. My worst incident was in March, south of Greenland, about 100 miles south, in March. 80-knot winds and 40-foot seas.
Wow.
We had to ballast with water so we wouldn't overturn. Did a lot of praying in that particular trip.
Did you get seasick?
Every time I left port, I was sick for at least a week.
And you never dreamed you'd have a career at sea, did you, as
Never.
a young man?
No.
So
I didn't even know the Coast Guard had vessels when I first joined it.
Unbelievable. And then you had a very interesting career building homes with your son.
Well,
and they weren't just any typical type of home either. They had a unique construction. Can you tell me about that?
Well, it's known as insulated concrete forms, or ICFs. Well, I think I should state that the longest place that we lived after getting out of the Coast Guard until now was in Hollowell, Maine. We found that Hollowell had the best school in the area of central Maine, and we went there with our 6 children and waited for all 6 of them to graduate from Halldale. We lived in a little place way up on a hill overlooking the town and
Nice.
the community. But after the 6th one finally graduated after 5 years, he took 5 years instead of the regular 4, my son, the oldest one, put himself through college, 5 years, half a day working, half a day studying and whatnot, and he's a Baptist minister. And he had a place out in central Maine. All of a sudden, it doesn't come to me, the little town. But anyway, he had a nice little church there, And his wife left him. I'm not sure why, but they left. So he brought his family into Hollowell, and we sold him our old home there, and I built this new retirement home. And I built it in 1997. The ICF's is a 4-foot block, 4 foot long, about 16 inches tall, and approximately a foot wide, and it's hollow, held together by foam. It's foam pieces held together by plastic.
Okay.
And you put them together and put steel rod in, and as you get up to the height you want, then you put in more steel vertically and then fill it with concrete. It's a super insulated house. My particular home was the first one that was built in this area, and I first found it in Canada when I was visiting relatives. And after building my home, I helped my son build his up the road a bit, and then he and my son-in-law, we all got together and we built over 100 houses in about 12 years.
It's
But when I
amazing.
turned 80, the missus says, it's time for your 4th retirement. So, and that's when I started painting, and it's all God's hands and my slides.
And so, and you did a lot of paintings of lighthouses, you told me.
Well, the first book that we had published, they paid $8,000 for the first 1,000 copies. Mm-hmm. They sold out in a year and a half at $20 a piece. So I wanted more books published, and how am I going to come about that? So I read an article in an art magazine that said, if you want to do a series, you have to be the same theme, the same size, and you've got to find a gallery that'll set them up for you. And I was able to do that. It took me a year and a half to paint all 65 of the Maine coast lighthouses.
Wow, you painted every lighthouse in Maine.
Yes, and all the same size as this one up here.
That's incredible. And you did it in a year and a half.
Well, I sometimes did 2 a week. If I've got the blue ink out, there's a lot of blue sky, a lot of blue water, and it was just a matter of drawing them and then painting them. It's God's hands. I push the brush.
But I mean, did you take any formal classes to learn how to paint?
None whatsoever.
No?
I've always drawn, and there are drawings in the book.
There are drawings in that book, yes.
Yeah.
And which medium did you find that you liked the most? I know you tried
I
oils.
tried oil once, but it smudges, takes a long time to dry. Mm-hmm. And I decided that I loved acrylics because I can mix them the way I like them. They're water-based, they dry fast, and if they don't dry fast enough, I even have a hair dryer. Put that hair dryer on and dry them up, and then I can overpaint the whole thing if I so desire.
So, and you're available for commission. If people want to hire you to do a painting of their home or their pet, right? You're
everything but portraits.
You don't like
because I cannot. Well, I probably could do a portrait, but it's very hard to please a person when they're looking at themselves as a painting.
That's very true. Yeah.
There's always that little gimmick that you didn't do correctly or something. But with acrylics, I probably could overpaint it, but I just don't want to bother with it. I'm too busy with my other art.
You know, I have always said that people of a golden age, and certainly you are of a golden age, are like libraries because they've lived so much life and they have so much to share with other people. And I wanted to ask you this question. I mentioned it to you earlier today, that if you were to make a statement to the world, what would it be?
I think the most important thing in the world is family. Properly married, not single parents. It happens, but a happily married family, raising a family, taking care of them, and then come along the grandkids and the great-grands, and even a few great-great-grands. Mm-hmm. And I'm from a large family. I was a spoiled brat, but I was taught proper respect. It bothers me today to see two children on a table across each other on the table texting instead of talking.
Yes.
Parents have to teach their children proper respect and a certain amount of knowledge. And I think that family is probably the most important thing in the world.
I couldn't agree more. Thank you so much for that. And is there anything else, like any life lessons or things that you want to share with us today that could make us better people? Or
Well, getting along isn't always easy. But if you set your mind to the better things in life and want to be willing to negotiate problems, talk it over, think about it, see the good points as well as the bad, and get rid of the bad. I was fortunate. I had a wife that understood that. She became Catholic in order to marry me. And, of course, I always lived near the woods, too, which was a big help. But going to bed at night, a kiss, a good night kiss. Good night, dear. And the same for the other side, the female side. It's a cooperative effort.
that's so true. You have been an absolutely delightful guest, and I'm honored that I own one of your beautiful paintings. This is Mount Gottharden in Maine in the early 1950s. I saw it on the wall at the restaurant, and I purchased it that day because I loved it so much. Not only am I fortunate to own your painting, but I'm fortunate to be your neighbor. And I'm going to commission you to do a painting in my home of a mural that I've had my eye on for a long time that I want done. So I can't thank you enough. You are a son of Maine, and you are an extraordinary human being.
Well, thank you, but you make me blush.
Oh, well, thank you for being my guest today. And if people would like to contact you to have a painting commissioned, we're going to put your name and phone number at the end of this interview.
Also, if they want to buy a book.
Oh, if they want to buy a
I'm
book
the only
as well.
one that has them other than a few at the Lighthouse Museum in Rockland, where I was a docent at one time, but the cost of gasoline kind of cut me back living in Richmond and an hour and a half drive or an hour and a quarter drive. So.
Thank you so much, Ernie, for being my guest today. And thank you for watching, and sweet dreams, everyone. Thank you so much for watching. You asked for it.